Hello, everyone. Hope you all are doing great. This is Anna, your host for today's session. And on behalf of Team Sign Up Training, I welcome you all to today's webinar on mastering Excel charts and graphs, communicate insights more effectively. Before we get started, few words about our today's speaker. Today we have Ms. Kathy Horwitz with us. Kathy teaches classes on the Microsoft suite of application software, including Excel, PowerPoint, Word, Access, and Outlook. Kathy has over 30 years of experience in classroom and virtual training and has been an instructor of Microsoft Office since 1989.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. So welcome, everybody. My name is Kathy Horwitz, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. A little bit about our course. We'll be talking about creating charts today. We'll be looking at defining the components of a chart, creating several charts. We'll format charts. We'll modify those charts by adding different chart elements. We'll discuss adding, editing, and removing data. And then we'll look at some specialty charts, annotating charts with trend lines, adding the statistical calculations. We'll create a combination chart showing data on both vertical axes at the same time. And we'll finish up by talking about spark lines, which are small charts that are enveloped within a cell itself. I'll be using Excel actually 365 today. If you have an earlier version of Excel, I'll be discussing some of the differences in the newer versions. Also, you've received some practice files or will be receiving them, and I want to point them out to you. First of all, I did provide you with a handout. And again, if you don't have them yet, they will be sent to you. The handout goes through everything that we're going to talk about during our course today. And it includes all the practice exercises that we'll be doing. In addition to that, you've also received a practice Excel file called Excel Charts. And that's the file that I'll be using to demonstrate our different features with today. When you receive that file, you can use it for reinforcement and practice after the webinar. Finally, there is a PowerPoint file. Depending on how we do with time, we're going to definitely talk about bringing charts into PowerPoint, but I wanted to give you a PowerPoint file to be able to practice with as well. So that is the plan for our session. Let's talk a little bit now about charts themselves. And let me switch over back to this file so we can point out a couple of things. So we create charts in order to visually represent numbers. On the Insert tab, there are several different types of charts you can create. Column charts, line charts, bar charts, pie charts, and the list goes on and on. The procedure for creating a chart is the same regardless of the type of chart that you're creating. But the three most popular types of charts that we'll work with today are column charts. Column charts are used to show a comparison. We might be comparing Q1 to Q2, for example. We'll look at line charts. Line charts tend to show a trend over time. The horizontal axis is usually time of some sort. And then pie charts. Pie charts break out the individual values relative to their grand total. Beginning with Excel 2016, there have been a lot of improvements with charts. And throughout our session, I'll be pointing those out to you. The biggest change of all is that depending on the type of data that you're working with, determines whether you have to select the data or not. Now, in the data that we're looking at right now, for example, I have quarterly data for 4 different locations. I have a total column for each location, and I have a quarterly total on row 10. If I were just comparing the quarters of data to each other, I only need the numbers that reflect the quarterly sales. I don't need the totals. However, I do need labels to describe what those numbers mean. So I would want the quarterly labels to know what quarter the numbers represent, and I would want the locations as well to identify what those numbers mean. So in some cases, you do have to select the data that you want to chart. And Excel has always been that way. Here's what's new. If you are charting all of the data, as I would be in this example, you no longer have to actually select it. You just have to click into the array of data, and Excel will look for the perimeter of data surrounding your mouse. So we would just have to click inside the data. We'll be creating a chart from this data shortly. Here's another short amount of data. If I'm charting all of the data, I only have to click inside of it. But if I am selecting only a part of the data to chart, or non-consecutive ranges of data, which we'll do today, then you do have to be selective. Excel 2016 also includes what are called recommended charts. And recommended charts will look at the data that you've selected or clicked into and find ways to chart that data using appropriate chart styles. Now, Excel doesn't understand the data. It simply looks at column headings and row headings, the type of data that you selected, and tries to determine the best type of chart. So we have that as an addition, starting with Excel 2016. I'm going to start on the quarterly sales tab down at the bottom of my screen here. Again, where we have our quarterly data for 4 different locations. Now, there is an amazing shortcut. Pressing function key number 11 on your keyboard will automatically create a 2-dimensional chart and put it on its own worksheet. Charts can be placed in one of 2 places. They can be on their own worksheets, or they can be on the worksheet with the data itself. If the data is within the chart worksheet by itself, it's called a chart sheet. And if the chart is on the same worksheet as the actual data, it's called an embedded chart. We're going to create both chart sheets as well as embedded charts today. And we're going to begin with our first exercises now. So I want to create a chart that will compare quarterly sales for my 4 locations. Again, we have to select more than just the numbers. We have to select column and row labels to identify what those numbers represent. I'm going to select A5 through E9 so that I have my numbers, my column headings, and my row headings. Now, using my keyboard shortcut, I'm going to go to my keyboard, and on the function keys on the very top row, I'm going to press the F11 key, F11. Watch what happens. It automatically takes me to a new sheet. Notice I'm on a sheet called Chart 1. And it creates a column chart that, if you look at the legend, is comparing the different locations to each other, quarter by quarter by quarter. The only downside of creating a chart sheet with F11 is that the font is really small. So let me show you a shortcut way to increase all of the text in the chart. We use our standard formatting tools on the Home tab. And there is a button on the Home tab next to font size, which is, it looks like a big letter A with an up arrow, and it's called Increase Font Size. So rather than clicking the down arrow and trying different numbers, we can click on Increase Font Size as many times as necessary to increase the font so that it's extremely readable. Now we can understand the data a little bit better. Notice the vertical axis goes from 0 to 6,000, taking into account our highest number, which is 4,900, and giving us some room for growth. It supplies us with an area to place a chart title. If we simply click on the chart title box, I'll type the words annual sales, and it goes right into that box. I'll rename the worksheet as well. We'll go down to the worksheet at the bottom. I'll right-click on the tab and choose Rename. And I'll call this Annual Sales Chart. So by pressing one key on the keyboard, we're able to take that data and chart it. Now, charts are always connected to their data. If I point to the first blue column, a tip comes up that tells me that blue column represents Connecticut, it's Q1, and its value is 700. If I go back to the sheet that contains the data, Q1, Connecticut, value 700 is referring to cell B6. If I change that value, I'm going to double it and make it 1400. When I go back to my chart, that first column goes up to 1400. So by default, charts are connected to their data. And let me tell you, it's really difficult to break that connection. Let's create some more charts. I'm going to go back to the quarterly sales chart just to review with you the data that we had selected. And again, because we were not charting all of the data, we had to be very selective. Now let's move to the chart types worksheet, where we have 3 different sets of data and 3 different charts that we're going to create. The first set of data at the top, imagine we're a store like Barnes & Noble. We sell books, we sell music. For the calendar year, we have book sales, and those are representative of thousands of dollars. And we have music sales. And we want to compare book sales to music sales. Not only do I need the numbers, of course, but I need my column headings and I need my row headings. So based on that, we're selecting all of the data. Starting in Excel 2016, we don't have to select it. We just have to click inside of it. And this time we're going to create an embedded chart, a chart that will be placed right on the worksheet with the data. We'll go to the Insert tab at the top of the screen, and there's a group called Charts. In the chart group, we have individual icons for the most popular types of charts. Here we have column charts or bar charts, good for comparing. We have line charts, good for showing a trend. And we have our pie charts, taking all of the individual numbers and comparing them to their grand total. We're going to create a column chart by clicking on the Insert Column or Bar Chart icon. Excel 2016 also now includes Live Preview, which means if I point to a chart type, I automatically see a preview of that chart in the background. As I point to the different chart types within the column chart and bar chart realm, you can see how the preview is changing in the background. I'm going to do a 2-dimensional column chart, much like F11 created. And once I click on it, the chart is embedded on the worksheet. Notice that it's comparing book sales to music sales. So it's comparing our columns of data to each other month by month. The chart by default sits right in the middle of your screen, but we can move it. With the chart selected, if I point in the upper right corner of the chart, that's called the chart area. If I click in the chart area, I can drag that chart around. I can move it, and I can put it in a place that would look best and not be covering up my data. The sizing handles, the circular handles at the top, bottom, left, right, and the corners can be used to make the chart wider or narrower. I can drag from the corners to control height and width together. So we can move the chart and we can size the chart. I'd like to talk about the different components that make up a chart. If I click off of the chart is deselected. If I click in the chart, I'm selecting the chart area. The chart area is all inclusive of everything in the chart. As we discussed before, we use our regular formatting tools on the Home tab to change the way our font looks. I'll go back to the Home tab. And if I click on B for bold, with the chart area selected, all the text becomes bold simultaneously. But I can select different components of the chart individually. For example, I can click on the legend at the bottom. We'll go up to the Home tab. I'll click I for italics, putting the legend into italics. I can select the vertical axis and apply formatting to that. I can click on one of the months and select the horizontal or the category axis. If I click in the background behind the columns, that's called the plot area, the part of the chart where the data is plotted. A lot of people put some shading behind the columns to make the column stand out a little bit more. We could use our paint bucket tool to do that. I'll go up to the Home tab, click the down arrow next to fill color, and I'll put a light gray in the background. Notice I can put any color in the background that I want. We'll go with a light gray. Coming out from each value is a horizontal line called a grid line. If I click on one of those, I can select them all. And then I can format those lines. I can delete them. I can make them dotted or dashed. If you right-click when they're selected, we can format those grid lines. And again, I can make them a solid line. I can make them a dotted line or a dashed line. I could even change their color. More on that later. If I click on one of the blue columns for books, it selects all of the blue columns or selects that series of data. And if I click on one of the orange columns, it selects all the orange columns. The colors are set up by default, but if you want to change them, we could use our paint bucket. I'll select the orange columns, click the down arrow on the paint bucket, and I'm going to go with green, a nice positive number color. So there are different parts to the chart, and in the booklet that you will get, I have all the different parts of the chart laid out for you, along with our practice of doing a little bit of formatting in the chart itself. And of course, we have a chart title. We'll click in the chart title area. We'll call this the ABC Company. Whoops. Let's type that correctly. I'm all thumbs today. And we'll put that into the title. When you select a chart, you also get two ribbons at the top of your screen. We get a tab called Chart Design, and we get a tab called Format. The Format tab is just changing color. It contains our paint bucket for inside color. We can change the outline color, the border around things, and I can put special effects like a shadow or a glow or a three-dimensional look. But it's the Chart Design tab that we're going to be focusing on mostly today. Once you create a chart, there are a variety of things that we can do. We're going to start on the far right-hand side of the ribbon and talk about moving the chart. We can move the chart to its own worksheet, again, much like F11 did. If I click on Move Chart, it tells me that right now it's an object in the chart type worksheet, but I could put it on a new worksheet and I can name that new worksheet at the same time. Once I name it and click OK, the chart will go to a new worksheet like our annual sales chart. It will still be connected to the data. I'm going to cancel out. We're going to leave it here on this worksheet for the practice. Second button from the right, you might also want to change the chart's type. It might be that once you create the chart, it's not presenting the data and communicating the message that you thought it would. If I click on Change Chart Type, I get every possible type of chart in Excel. And for each type of chart that I select, I get different subtypes across the top. So staying with column charts, I'm going to choose the second one called a stacked column chart. That shows me the contribution of books compared to the contribution of music, but it also, by stacking them, shows me their cumulative value. Sometimes looking at the data in a percent format makes more sense. I'll click on Change Chart Type and click on the third column chart subtype called a stacked 100% column chart. That changes my vertical axis to go from 0 to 100%. My total sales represent 100% of my sales. For January, I can see that books is just shy of 30% of my total sales, making music just a little more than 70%. So different chart types present the data differently. But we can go outside of that chart type and, for example, do a line chart. Now, the line chart shows the trend of sales over the course of the year. We're really not comparing book sales to music sales. We're looking at the books trend line and saying, how did books do over the course of the year? We definitely had peaks and valleys. We had some downturned areas, and we had some very level areas. But it was pretty volatile. And then we look at the orange line and look at the music trend. But we're really not comparing the data. So a different message. I'll click on Change Chart Type again. Let's do a bar chart. Bar charts are like column charts in that they compare data, but they're horizontal rather than vertical. It's personal preference. And one more time, I'll click on Change Chart Type. We'll go back to a column chart. I'll select the two-dimensional default and click OK. We'll come back to selecting data in just a moment. Let's jump over to the fourth button from the right, Switch Row and Column. Now, by default, it's comparing book sales to music sales. As I said, we're comparing the columns of data to each other. But what if I really wanted to compare the rows? How did the months do against each other for books? How did the months do against each other for music? I'll click Switch Row and Column, and now it's comparing the rows of data to each other. First for books, then for music. And that's just a toggle. Click it once, we go back to comparing the columns. Click it again, we're back to comparing the rows. And we'll go back to columns. Then in the middle of the ribbon, we have the chart styles. Chart styles make small changes to the worksheet. As I point to them, I get a live preview. Notice it goes back to the original colors. This one happens to add the data values from the worksheet onto the columns themselves, moves the legend to the top, and eliminates the vertical axis. This one just puts a little bit of a different background in the columns. Here's one that does a darker background altogether. And we could point to these one by one. This one darkens up the colors. I like that one. And you might want to open the gallery because there are a couple of different rows of these items. Some change the font. And again, they're just very subtle changes. To the left of the chart styles is a button called Change Colors. The default colors are the colors in our color palette, blue and then orange. And if we had more series of data, For example, when I switched row and column, the columns that are in color, those colors are preset. But if I want to change the color palette altogether, I can click on Change Colors, and I have different color palettes that are colorful, some brighter than others, and then I have some that are monochromatic. Using the same color, gradient going from dark to light, or if we scroll down a little bit more, gradient going from light to dark, depending on the type of emphasis that you want to make. I'm going to click on one of the different color palettes and notice that my styles change to reflect that color palette. Let's scroll down to the next set of data, starting in row 22, where we've taken one genre of book, fiction, and we have those numbers. I want to see the trend of fiction book sales over the course of the calendar year. I want to know where those high points were or those low points. Where do we need new marketing campaigns? Now, looking at the numbers, they all look very close together. But because they're close together, there's even more volatility. Again, we would want to select the numbers as well as the labels, so I can just click inside of the data. We'll go to the Insert tab, and I'm going to click on the icon for a line chart right below column charts. When I click on line charts, I'm going to pick the first one, and it shows me the trend of fiction book sales over the course of the year. Now, looking at that line, we can understand our sales cycle better. Sales clearly ramped up for the holiday, October, November, December. We also hit a peak in July. Why did we hit a peak in July? Well, we're selling fiction books, vacation time. People want to take those fictional books to the beach or to the pool. That might also explain the peak in April, spring break. Sales went down in August. Could we attribute that to back to school? Perhaps. But then sales also went down in May. May is the month of Mother's Day. Maybe we need a new sales campaign to encourage people to buy books for their mothers as Mother's Day gifts and bring that May value up. So looking at a chart tells you about your data and helps you think of ways to improve those cycles. If I click into the chart area, again, I could go to the Home tab. I could change the font if I want to go from Calibri to say, let's pick a different font here. Let's take one that's easy to read. We'll go to Century Gothic. If I click on the vertical axis, I can make it bold. And if I click on the horizontal axis, I can make it bold. The title comes from the title of the column, and notice there's no legend because there's only one series of data. So the title of the column becomes the title on the chart, but we can edit that. By selecting the title box and then clicking inside of it, I might call this Fiction Sales. And maybe we'll change the font of that title by changing the font's color to blue. So we use the same formatting tools to format a chart. When I select my chart and look at the Chart Design tab, my chart styles now reflect a line chart. And again, we can point to these one by one. I happen to like this one a lot. Shows the values and eliminates the vertical axis. They're all just a little bit different. Some add a little bit of a textured background. Some go from a light background to a completely dark background. I happen to like this one. I think we'll pick that. And then finally, let's scroll down to our third set of data, where we have some budget information. I'm only interested in the 2019 budget, but I need the labels to describe what those budget numbers represent. Now, do I need the data on row 40? That's optional. If I'm going to put a title on the chart of my own, I don't need the label 2019 budget. I know that there's only 1 year's worth of data in the chart and that it's going to be 2019. But in this case, when we select the data, we're selecting non-consecutive sets of data. And we use the control key to be able to select non-consecutive cells. I'll select the words human resources through finance. I'm going to hold down my control key, and then I'll click the 2019 budget values for those departments. Again, I selected the departments first, held down the control key, and while holding it, selected the numbers for those departments. We'll go to the Insert tab, and this time we'll create a pie chart. We have 2-dimensional pies, 3-dimensional pies, and donut charts typically are used to show proportions of a whole a different way, but it can show multiple series of data. So I could have shown the 2018 budget as compared to the 2019 budget. We're only doing 2019, and we'll do a 3-dimensional pie. I'll point in the upper right corner, the chart area, move the pie off of my data, size it the way I want. And clearly marketing has the largest share of the 2019 budget. I'll add a title by clicking the chart title box, and this is the 2019 department budget. So we can create column charts, line charts. I'm going to make that one a little bit smaller, and pie charts. We can select the different parts of a chart. We can format them. Now let's talk about adding labels to the chart. Labels help to give the chart more value by identifying more about the data. I'm going to scroll back up to my column chart. We said that the numbers here represent thousands of dollars. So we didn't sell $350 of books. It was $350,000 worth of books. I'll select my chart and go to the Chart Design tab. First button on the ribbon is called Add Chart Element, and that allows us to add different pieces to the chart. I'll click on Add Chart Element, take a look at the different kinds of things. We'll go over several of these yet today. I want to add a title to my vertical axis. I'll point to Axis Titles and choose the primary vertical axis and click. And notice the label that I got, and notice how it's rotated to take up as little space as possible. I'll select that label and type in thousands, and it goes into the text box. Let's scroll down to our line chart. I'll click into the line chart to make it active, and we're going to add a label to the horizontal axis to show that this is for the year 2021. We'll click on Add Chart Element. I'll point to Axis Titles, and I want to put a title on the horizontal axis. Now I am going to have to open this chart up a little bit to make a little bit more room for it. I'll click on the axis title and type fiscal year 2021. So adding labels adds value to your chart. Finally, we'll come down to the pie chart. And on the pie chart, I want to show the percentages. What percent of the budget was given to marketing, to admin, to sales, to finance? Those are called data labels. We'll click to select our chart, and we'll go to the first button on the ribbon, Add Chart Element. There are fewer choices with a pie chart because a pie chart doesn't have a vertical or a horizontal axis. So a lot of the things we can do on other charts, we're not able to do in a pie chart. But I am able to add what are called data labels. And it basically says, where do you want the labels to go? Inside the pie, outside the pie, wherever they best fit. But if I point to, for example, outside end or inside end, notice that it's going to put the values. I don't want the values, I want the percentages. The immediate drop-down boxes only give us the immediate choices. If I want all choices, at the bottom of each of these drop-downs will always be something that says more. More data label options. More trend lines. I'm going to click on more data label options, and that opens up a task pane on the right side of my screen, where we could see that it is showing us the value as opposed to the percent. I'm going to turn off value and turn on percent, and it does the math for me. In fact, I could have value and percent both displayed. And if I keep following that dialog box down, it says that I can choose a separator. What do I want to separate the value from the percent with? By default, it's separated by a comma. But I could click that down arrow and say separate them by a semicolon. Or even put them on two separate lines. If I keep scrolling, I can change the position of the labels, putting them in the center of the pie, inside the edge of the pie, or outside the edge of the pie, or wherever they best fit. I like them on the outside, but they are a little big. I can go to the Home tab and use the Decrease Font Size button and take their font size down a little bit, maybe make them italics. We can close the task pane on the right by clicking its X in the upper right-hand corner. So adding labels to our chart, titles, axis labels, data labels, help to increase the communication of the data. Let's talk now about adding and removing data from a chart. I'm going to go to the next worksheet in the workbook, labeled Survey 1, where we have survey results from a travel agency, looking at different locations and looking to see how many respondents there were on the survey, people who travel primarily for business, for leisure, and we gave them a third category called Other. Not quite sure what Other would be, but it's in the data and I wanted to have multiple sets of data. So in this first chart that we'll create, I only want to chart business and leisure. So again, because we're charting part of the chart, we need to select it. I'll select A4 through C12. We'll go to the Insert tab. We want to compare business travel to leisure, so we'll do a column chart. We'll do a two-dimensional column chart, and I'll move the chart off to the right. So we can see that Europe and the United States have the most travel, and it seems to be in most cases that business travel outweighs leisure with the exception of Europe. Now, if I decide that I want to add the leisure category to the data, notice that when the chart is selected, the data is outlined. The column headings are outlined in red, the row headings in purple, and the data in blue. In the lower right corner of the blue box surrounding the data is what looks like an autofill handle. And I can use that to extend the data that feeds the chart. If I put my mouse on that little corner, lower right corner, my mouse becomes a double-sided arrow. I'm going to click and pull to the right to include the other category. And when I let go, the other category is added to the chart. Let's try some more examples. I'll go to the Survey To tab, where we already have a chart created. And notice that it charts Australia through Japan. If I click on the chart, it highlights in the numbers the data that is being charted. I want to add the South African data, but I don't want to add the Middle East. Now, ordinarily, I could drag that box down and include South Africa, but that would include the Middle East as well. So another way of adding data to a chart is to copy and paste. I'm going to select cell A11 to D11, the South African data. And I'm going to copy the data. I'll do a right-click copy. And then I'll select the chart. Now, it's important to note that right-click paste will not work on a chart. We do have to use the keyboard shortcut, Control-V. And when I type Control-V, it adds South Africa to my data. So we can copy and paste data from the worksheet into the chart. Okay? So far, so good, everybody, I hope. So now I want to add the US data. You'll notice that when I select the chart, it doesn't highlight with the colored borders because I don't have sequential data selected. We have Australia through Japan, we skipped the Middle East, and we added South Africa. So because the data is not sequential, I don't see those borders in the data. We added South Africa by copying and pasting. We're going to add the United States a different way. I'm going to select my chart, and I'm going to go to my Chart Design tab. There's a button on the right-hand side, third button from the right, called Select Data. And this is used to change the range of data that the chart is producing. I'll click on Select Data, and it shows me on the left side my different legend entries, and on the right side, my different category entries. Notice I only have an Add button on the left, but where I want to add data is actually on the right. But I have an option to switch the row and column. Again, all these steps are in your book, so you can go back and practice. I'm going to click on Switch Row and Column, moving the countries over to the left-hand side. And I'm going to add a new country. We want to add the United States. I'll click on Add. And it wants to know two things, the name of the series and the values for the series. The name of the series is United States, which appears in A12. I'll click on A12. And the series of data, I'm going to backspace everything except the equal sign. The data is in B12 to D12. When I click OK, if I look in the background, notice it's transposed my data. That's because I clicked on Switch Row and Column. So we need to switch them back. And now the United States is included in my category access data. and we'll see the series for the United States on the far right. Let's go to the Series 3, Survey 3 worksheet. I'm going to make this chart a little bit bigger for this example. I want to delete a series of data. I want to delete the leisure series. Leisure is represented by orange. I'm going to click on one of the orange columns, which selects the entire series of data, and I'll press the delete key on my keyboard, which removes that series not from my worksheet, but from within the chart itself. Now, what if I want to add it back in? Again, because I don't have sequential data selected for the chart, I don't see the bordered outlines in the data. So I have to add it using my Select Data button. And I want to go through that with you one more time. We'll select the chart, third button from the right, click on Select Data. And this time the legend entries are on the left, and that's where I want to add a new series. I want to add leisure back in. I'll click on Add, and I'll get the same boxes. The series name is what appears in C4, the word leisure. And the values will backspace out everything but the equal sign. The values fall into cell C5 through C12. When I click OK and OK again, notice it added leisure, but leisure is now the third series of data because I added it last. What if I want to rearrange the columns? Once again, we use Select Data. I'll click on Select Data, and on the left side of the screen, I have Move Up and Move Down arrows. I'll click on Leisure, and I'll use the Move Up arrow to move it up so that it's between Business and Other. Click OK, and now the orange columns are in the middle, representing leisure. Hope everybody's doing okay. Let's jump over to the tab labeled Trend Lines. And let's explore some of the specialty charts. Now in this chart, we have a line chart showing us a trend of sales. We have data for a calendar year, and the sales are representative of millions. And we've noted that in the title of the chart, as opposed to adding an axis label. We can see that the sales increased overall, but were relatively volatile. But I want to see the overall trend, so we can create what's called a trend line. Now, there are all different kinds of trend lines, statistically speaking. I'm just going to scroll through the booklet here. Again, everything we've talked about is in the booklet: changing the chart style, moving a chart to its own worksheet, adding different kinds of labels to the chart. Our exercises on adding and removing data using the sample worksheets that we have in our workbook. But I want to forward us to trend lines. There are 6 different trend lines that you can choose from. Now, if you're of a statistical nature, you already know what these different types of trend and regression lines mean. But I have them laid out in the book for you anyway. We have linear. A linear trend line would be a straight line that best fits your data points. A logarithmic line is more of a curved line. That's more useful when the data increases or decreases quickly and then levels out quite a bit. Where polynomial lines are best used when there's a lot of data fluctuation, lots of hills and valleys, so to speak. So we're going to create a trend line. I can also use trend lines to forecast data. So I have data for 12 months. What if I want to go 3 months farther into the future? Based on the 12 months of data that I do have, what would the next 3 months probably look like? And finally, we can add the statistical equation that goes with the trend line. Now, again, if you're a statistician, you already know what those equations would look like. One of them is called an R-squared value. When you draw a trend line, you want the R-squared value to be as close to the number 1 as possible. That shows it being most effective. And so when we draw the trend line, we can also draw out the equation to check the validity of the trend line. I'll select our line chart and go to the Chart Design tab. First button on the ribbon, Add Chart Element. And one of the items I can add is a trend line. Now I could just pick one of those lines. If I point to them, for example, I'll get a preview of them on the screen. One of them automatically does forecasting for 2 months, but I have exponential, linear. But remember that to get all of the choices, we always want to click on the More option. So if I go to trend lines again, I have an option called More Trend Line Options, which opens up that task pane on the right. Gives me every possible choice. So I can create any kind of trend line. We'll go with the linear trend line. That's the straight line. If I scroll down a little bit, I can forecast. I can forecast forward or backwards to see where I had been. That'll help you check validity. Also, if you don't have any historical data, that could provide some historical data. We're going to go forward 3 months. So that would be 3 periods forward. And then I have the option to display the equation on the chart. I'm going to check the box for that. And to display the R-squared value, which notice comes out to 0.9. Notice that my trend line is extended out by a dotted line 3 months beyond our current data. When we're done with the trend line options, we simply use the X in its upper right corner to close the task pane. And we have our chart with our trend line as well as our statistical equations, which I'll move to the upper right corner. That's a trend line. Another kind of specialty chart is a combination chart. I'm going to go to the next worksheet in the workbook. Again, I'll make this a little bit bigger. So in our data on the left, for 4 months, we have expenses and we have sales. And then in column D, we have profit. And profit is created by using a calculation. You can see it here on the formula bar. It takes sales minus expenses divided by sales. And that's the standard calculation for profit. By looking at the legend in my chart, I can see that sales, expenses, and profit have all been charted. But yet I don't see any columns for profit. And that's because of the size of the values. The sales and expenses are all upwards of 10,000. Yet my profits are all less than 1. So profit is included in the chart, but the columns are so small we don't see them. We can create a secondary axis on the right side of the chart that shows numbers that we can plot the percentage on. 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, or 0.01, 0.02. These are all less than 10%. How do we do that? We start by selecting the chart. We'll go to the Charts Design tab. And I'm going to click on Change Chart Type. Now, when I change chart type, I can go to a line chart, for example, and again, it shows sales and expenses, but I don't see profit. Go to change chart type, go back to column. So how do we get to see that profit series? We're going to go to the Format tab, the Format tab. In order to change the profit series of data, I have to select it. I can't select it if I can't see it. But on the Format tab, the first group on the left, which is called Current Selection, allows me to select a part of the chart. That top drop down shows me every part of the chart. I can use it to select the legend. I can click the drop down and say select expenses. Click the drop down, say select the plot area. But I can also use it to select the series of data called profit. Notice at the bottom of the screen that it has selected the values for profit, albeit their value is very, very small. But once I select them, I can change the way they look. Right under the drop down to select the item is a button to format the selected item. I'm going to click on Format Selection, and Excel knows that there is a difference between the values of sales and expenses and the values of of profit. So it's suggesting to us that we plot profit on a secondary axis. I'll select secondary axis and look at the axes on the right side of the screen. Goes from 0 to 10%, while the axis on the left-hand side of the screen goes from 0 to 20,000. So the gray columns represent profit, but notice how they're sitting on top of our sales and expenses. It would look better if I used a line chart to show the trend of profit over those 4 months. With the profit series of data selected, I'll go back to the Charts Design tab, and we're going to change the chart type just for the profit series of data. I'll click on Change Chart Type, and it automatically goes to what we call a combination chart. A combination chart has 2 different types of chart overlaid to each other. Right now, expenses, sales, and profit are all being shown as column charts. It shows me that profit is on a secondary axis, and I'm going to change the chart type for the profit series to a line chart. So not only is profit on a second axis, but we're changing the type of chart to a line chart. And now notice that line representing profit. And we see all the different data points, and it's being plotted using the axis on the right-hand side. I'm going to make it a little bit darker so that we could see it better. I'll go to Shape Outline and make it black. So the sales and expenses are being shown using a column chart and the axes on the left. And the profit is being shown via a line chart using the axis on the right. In the book, we talk about creating a combination chart, and I give you all the steps to work through the exercise. Selecting the profit series, formatting that series, putting it on a secondary axis, and then changing the chart type, yielding our result. Charts can be copied from Excel into PowerPoint or into Word. We copy and paste them the traditional way. We select the chart, we copy it. We go to the PowerPoint slide or the Word file, go to the correct location and paste it in. But when you paste it, you will get 5 different paste options. The colors being used in PowerPoint could be different than the colors being used in Excel. In fact, quite often they are. So we have the choice of keeping Excel's colors or adapting to the PowerPoint colors. And we also have the option to embed the data using the original colors or PowerPoint's colors, or we can link the data using PowerPoint's colors or Excel colors. When you embed a chart, the data becomes part of the PowerPoint slide and you can edit the data. There's no link to Excel. Updating the Excel file does not update the PowerPoint. But when I link the data stays in the Excel file. And if I want to modify the data, I need to open the Excel file to do so. It creates a link. So I'm going to open up very quickly a PowerPoint file called our fiscal achievements. And I'm going to add a new slide at the end called title only. And I'm going to call this pasting a chart. We'll take our combination chart and copy it to the PowerPoint slide. Notice that the colors being used in Excel are quite different than the colors being used in PowerPoint. I'll right-click on the chart and choose Copy. And I'll go to my PowerPoint slide. The paste options come up when I right-click to paste. And we'll get a preview in the background. The first one says use PowerPoint's colors and embed the data. The data becomes part of the PowerPoint slide. The second one says keep Excel's colors and embed the data. Third one, use PowerPoint's colors and link to the Excel file so that updates in Excel will update my slide. The fourth one, keep Excel's colors and link the data. And the fifth and final tool pastes it as a picture where the data cannot be updated at all. So I'm going to link the data and use PowerPoint's colors. Now you'll notice that my first column, if I point to it, its value is 10,000. And if I go back to Excel, my first column is at 10,000, corresponding to cell B4. I'm going to change that to 15,000. Changed my profit margin immensely. But I'm more interested in just showing you that in PowerPoint, that first column went up to 15,000. So when we link the data, if PowerPoint is open and I update Excel, PowerPoint will update as well. The instructions, of course, are in your booklet. And finally, we have sparklines. Sparklines are little miniature charts that sit inside of a cell in the worksheet and are used to show a trend in your data. We have three different kinds of sparklines. We have line sparklines, column sparklines, and what are called win-loss sparklines. And we'll do examples of all three. I'm going to move to the last worksheet in the workbook called sparklines. So in this worksheet, much like our first worksheet that we looked at, I have quarterly sales and I have different sales groups. Now, if I wanted to look at those in a chart and see their trend, I could select the data, click on the Insert tab, create a line chart. The line chart takes up a great deal of screen space. And the lines, we get that spider web effect. And it's kind of difficult to read the chart. So what we're going to do instead is put the line into the cell to the right of the sales group to show the quarterly trend of sales. We'll start by clicking in cell F5, and I'll go to the Insert tab. To the right of charts is a group called Spark Lines, and we'll start with a line spark line. I'll click on line. It says, where's the data that you want to chart? Well, we're looking at the quarterly data for the Northeast group. That would be B5 to E5. We already chose where the spark line was to go. We started out in cell F5, and I'll click OK. Now, the trend line does look a little flat. I will say they look better if you make the rows taller. I'm going to select rows 4 through 9, point between any two of the lines, and increase their height a little bit. So we can see that quarter 1 started out low, quarter 2 did not get much better. Between quarters 2 and 3, we had a nice increase and then leveled off for quarter 4. I'll click into cell F6, insert. Let's do a column spark line. Again, it's going to ask me what data do I want to plot. We're looking at the Southeast data, B6 to E6. My target cell was already selected. And instead of showing a line, it shows me columns to represent the values of the numbers. Quarter 1 was quite low. Quarter 2 went up, quarter 3 went down, quarter 4 went up to be the highest quarter. And a win-loss spark line shows only positive versus negative values. I'll select cell F7, insert. We'll do a win-loss spark line. And I'm looking at the data in B7 to E7. And notice that all the columns are the same height, but they're above a center imaginary line. Now, what happens if I make one of those numbers a negative number, even like -1? It just shows that it is a negative number. A win-loss line does not show value. It simply shows positive by a blue column above that center imaginary line, or a red column below to signify a negative value. I'll click undo to put that value back. Spark lines have their own ribbon. If I click on one of my spark lines, I get a spark line ribbon at the top. And through the ribbon is the only way to delete the spark lines. I'm going to select the spark lines in F6 and F7. If I press my delete key, nothing happens. But on the ribbon at the right side is a button called Clear. Clear the selected spark lines. I have to click on Clear to remove them. Let's go back to F5 and embellish that line a little bit. I want to show the high point and I want to show the low point. I'll click on the spark line ribbon. Right in the middle are styles, which means basically I can change the color of the line. To the left of that, I can show the high point or the low point. I know it's hard to see, but the points by default are like little blue diamonds. To the right of the styles, I can change the spark line's color as well as its weight. So I can go to weight and make the spark line thicker. And I can change the marker colors. Let's make the high point, instead of blue, we'll make it green. I'll go back to marker color. We'll make our low point red. So the low point was first quarter. The high point was third quarter. And now, amazingly enough, to get that same type of spark line into the remaining 4 cells, we can use autofill like we do with formulas. We'll select F5, go to the box on the lower right corner. Click and hold and pull that down through the total row, and I get spark lines representing each series of data for each sales group as well as the total. And we can see that our total did have somewhat of an upward trend overall, representing the trend of all of the data. Spark lines and the exercises to create them are in your books as well. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. We use charts to visually display data, and if it's a complex set of data, it makes it easier to understand and comprehend when it's in a picture format. We've talked about creating charts in Excel, but you can create charts in PowerPoint and Word using the same tools, insert charts. And charts that are already in Excel can be copied to Word or to PowerPoint. The ribbons that you get when you select a chart will be the same regardless of which program you're in. So learning it once is learning it for all 3 programs. It's my hope that you learned a lot today, and I want to thank you for joining me in this journey for mastering Excel charts. I'm going to turn control of our workshop back over to Anne, our host, and she will open it up for questions and giving us some closing remarks.
Thank you, Kathy, for this wonderful presentation. So attendees, as Kathy mentioned, we are going to start our today's Q&A session. So if you have any doubts or any question to our speaker, you can unmute your phone lines and ask, or else you can use the chat box to type in. Kathy will wait for a while and see if we get any questions. And yeah, and meantime, before we end the session, would you like to add something?
Once again, I just want to thank everybody for attending today. There is always something new to learn about Excel. So I encourage you to stay attuned to our website, look for future Excel trainings coming up, and it would be my pleasure to work with you again. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, so I don't see any questions as of now. And yes, we keep going live with many Excel sessions with Kathy, and there are multiple. So if you are more interested, please visit our website once again and you can check out. So this brings us to the end of this event. We are really thankful to our expert Kathy Horwitz and each one of you for being a part of the session. And we hope that you all found this training informative and helpful. Also, we are looking forward to see you all again in our future events as well. Wishing you all a great day ahead. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.